Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I'm Brigid Burke, and today is the 2nd of March, 2025. I want to give apologies. I just realized usually when I'm done with this live stream, I usually schedule the next one. And when I looked this morning, I said, I looked at like 7:15 this morning. I was like, I didn't schedule a live stream yesterday. So I scheduled it quite late. So people might be late in being notified. So anyway, apologies for that. Because I know some people do follow this every day. So I just wanted to, it may rely on that notification coming in. So yeah, so in any case, it's a nice day, but it's really cold. And Kathleen's on. Good morning, Kathleen. Yeah, we'll see. I thought there was somebody else who had popped in as well. So we'll see who else pops in. Yeah, it's gotten very, very cold. Like we went from being like almost 60 degrees to being like, I think it was 18 when I woke up this morning. But it's temporary. I think today and tomorrow are supposed to be cold, and then we're supposed to start moving back up temperature-wise again. I don't think the extreme cold really lasts at this time of year anyway. So yeah, so we will see what today actually brings. Today is interesting topic-wise. The thing that I had a couple of things on my mind today. The first thing, well, one of them has to do, it's a topic. I'm trying to think about exactly how to approach it because it's a somewhat deep topic, I think. And it's an interesting one, and it comes kind of in the thought of thinking about spirit guides and thinking about how spirit guides, we've talked before about, well, how do you know who your guides are? How can you validate that they're real, that they're actually who they say they are? Certainly, and Alistair's on. Good morning, Alistair. So how do we know what's going on with spirit guides and so forth? And because sometimes we may feel like we are guided, and spirit guides manifest in different ways to different people. Sometimes people feel, for example, that an ancestral spirit, like, oh, grandma passed on and grandma is now I feel like she's there guiding me. Like, okay, you'll hear things, people say things like that. You may also talk about a guide. If somebody practices a certain religion, they may feel the deity within that religion is a particular type of guide. And we also may have other kinds. Good morning. We may also have other types of guides as well that we might have. So yeah. So we will actually see. So I was thinking a lot about guides and about what is the way that guides can manifest to us, because there's a wait a second here. Okay. It's so okay. So we're going to talk about spirit guides this morning, and the way that I wanted to talk about them was the fact that, okay, we've talked a lot about angels on this particular live stream. Okay, so I have talked about angels. And when we're talking about them, there's a lot of discussion about what you're actually seeing there. What are you actually connecting with? What are you actually tuning into? And I started thinking about these kinds of the way in which angelic beings and so forth, okay, the way that they appear to us is not actually what they are. Okay. There's the way that a particular spirit connects with us. It connects in a way that we can actually understand. So when when people say that they see certain things, or even if people say that they have an image of certain spaces, like I found myself thinking about people who have NDEs, for example, and say, oh, I had a vision of heaven, or I had a vision of the afterlife. Typically, the visions that we have are connected to the visions that we have are now connected to what we think we're going to see, or we're connecting to it in a way that that makes sense to our brains. And our brains are something that they're very limited, okay, in what they can understand. So when I talk, for example, about working with Azrael, when I work with Azrael, there's a form that he shows to me, and so yeah, there's a form that he shows to me, and in showing me that form, people will say like, oh well, that's what he is, that's what he looks like. And the reality is, no, that's probably not what he looks like. He's probably this is probably not what he looks like. He's actually something. What he actually is something that's actually beyond our comprehension. And so when we talk about understanding something, one of the things that I had wanted to bring up today and is this idea of, okay, I was reading from the Chandipat at this point, and in the Chandipat, which I talk about a lot, people who are regulars on this live stream are very well aware that I talk about this book quite a lot, and it's known as different things in different cultures. And so I found myself thinking about a particular passage this morning where there is, okay, where they talk about, now the Chandipat, for people who are not familiar, or if I just need to kind of refresh your memory on it, has to do with has to do with the fact when the forces of ego take over the world. And as I've said, it tends to be a feminine force that is manifests to fight back. And what's interesting is that what they would call the material force or the demonic force in this is often referred to as thoughts. It's literally translated as thoughts. That thoughts are the thing that are the enemy that end up conquering the gods. And so there's two different episodes that are actually shown within Chandi. And the two episodes that are shown, one is, there's a first one where there is the great ego takes over and not only insults the gods, but gets people to forget about them. Now we have to remember that, again, in Hinduism, that gods are really kind of like what we see in a lot of paganism. It's like they are, they have, okay, there's the question of what kind of a reality do they have? But then they also seem to be these forces that are they represent forces that act on our psyche. Okay, they're things that affect us. So they can be thoughts, but they can also be feelings and intuitions. They're often conceived of in this way, and the interactions that you will see between these forces, which are also not considered to be separate from us. As I've indicated in Hinduism, the outside and the inside are not particularly different. Like the idea that you are separate from that is illusory. Okay, that's the Eastern view, whereas the Western view focuses on the difference between those two things. So, so we were saying that. So I found this path. Listen to me. This particular passage came into my head today. And what it is there is, okay, so we have this condition, and this condition repeats, okay, because when we're in these cycles, we've talked about the yugas and the cycles, and we've talked about whether or not there is a yuga ending in about 19 days. That's been under discussion a lot, and which one it actually is. But typically when you talk about the end of a yuga, when we talk about the end of a yuga, what we're talking about is a period of time when things are, when there's a very, very severe imbalance that's going on. So it's, let me see if this will work. So, okay. So yeah, so there is definitely a, sorry, there's been a few things in the chat today that have been abnormally active. So I've had to do some clearing as I go along from people. So this has been distracting what I'm trying to say here. Okay. So what tends to happen in this particular story is that when this becomes very, very severe, and it's usually described in a certain way, like up here it says, we gods have been harassed by arrogant thoughts in the manner of humans, and at this time all of gods bow to the seer of all. When bowed with devotion, and remembered in a physical image, immediately terminates our every adversity. Now that's an interesting way to think about it, because the bottom line is what you're dealing with is not something that's manifest. Okay, you're not, when you're dealing with these kind of energies, they are not, you're not dealing with energies that are manifest. So so when we talk about God, or we talk about the image of God, or the image of anything that we approximate with the divine, you're not in a space where you can we're not in a space where you can ultimately, what you're talking about is not something you can approach with thought. Okay, Carl Jung has said that your image of God is ultimately the religious, your conception of God and your religion is the final barrier to your religious experience. Because when we create an image and we hang on to that image, then we assume that that's what it is. That's what it looks like. That's what God really is, or that's what this thing really is. The problem is we don't know that. We really don't. And so this passage I thought was very interesting, and it came into my mind this morning. So what's happening here is, this is the condition that's happening. The gods are upset. They're going to appeal to this great Devi, the great Chundi, to help them, to do battle on their behalf with these thoughts that they cannot overcome. The thoughts have overcome the gods. And this goes back to what I say a lot of the time about the way in which thoughts become a prison. We are so trapped in our heads. We are so impressed by our own rationality that we don't actually see, we're so impressed by it that we're not, that we think that that's all that there is. We say, oh, well, and by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's, okay, the conceptions that we have, like I said, of a place like, say, heaven or some other kind of equivalent, that they exist in the way that our minds think that they do. Because I imagine that they don't. That was sort of a conversation I had with Azrael this morning about a certain rays. They talk about these angelic rays that the angels exist on. And I told him, I said, well, I feel like when I see this particular ray, I see it like in color. I said, but there's really, even if I see details to it, I said, I just feel like to say like, oh, well, this is a space that has like trees and rocks and mountains and houses. Like, and he's like, no, that's not what these spaces are like. They're completely beyond our comprehension. So I think it's interesting here when these gods are all getting together and praying to what they call the Supreme Empress of the universe, okay, who's usually some, what do they call it? Was it Sabdavitan Suran? There's probably a whole thing that she had. She asks the gods whose praise is being sung here. Now, mind you, she's the supreme goddess. They're saying, oh, they're praying to this Devi, and she's like, well, who are you talking to? And then this line is interesting because she says, so they tell her self-conceit and self-depreciation, Shumba Nishumba, two terrible thoughts have defeated the gods and insulted them. So the gods have collected here and are singing my praise. Now that's interesting. She's talking to herself, right? And yes, from within herself, an auspicious form manifested. That was the line I was looking for. Within herself, an auspicious form manifested. So an auspicious form would be like a Lakshmi type form, or a form that is, or Bhadrakali, or one of these forms that's very auspicious. And as the mother of the universe emerged from within the goddess of nature, she is known in all the world as she who comes from within. After the manifestation of she who comes from within, the body of nature became dark, and consequently became a goddess who dwells in the Himalayas, distinguished as the remover of darkness. So that's interesting. I just find that line and that way of thinking about things interesting. So we're talking about the supreme power who is really unmanifest. And we hear about this in a lot of places. When we talk about in Gnosticism, you talk about the pleroma, which is something that is unmanifest. And even in the Gnostic texts, when there is an appeal, it has to take on a form and then say, well, what are you reaching out to me for? But it's not, because it's something that's beyond thought. It doesn't have a body, it doesn't have a physical appearance, and it doesn't have thought as we think about it, right? So and I don't know, and I think I also noted in here, I've told this story about how the great ego sees her and wants to possess her, this beautiful woman, this beautiful form that this goddess takes. And he sends an emissary, and the emissary's name is He Who Appears to Be a Friend, which I think is, I'd kind of forgotten about that. I thought that was kind of funny. He who appears to be a friend is coming to say, you know, all these nice things to you so that you'll do the thing that they want. And then when she's just like, well, you know, sorry, can't do that. Then they turn vicious. You know, we see a lot of examples of this. So, so in any case, the other card that I drew this morning that's connected to this theme of manifest and unmanifest. So in other words, when a guide or a being, I think this is where I'm going with this, when a guide or a being appears to you in some form. Now, again, there's a couple different ways you can look at it. One way that you can look at it, and this is the way a lot of times those who are more into a psychological view will look at it. They'll say, well, this form is really a projection. It's something you're projecting outwards and you're giving it kind of a form. An extreme example of that would be what they call an egregore. Sometimes people refer to it as a tulpa, but a tulpa, I think, is something more intentionally created through cities or through powers. And what that is a being that is that is actually the product of thought. Okay, so it's not something that's beyond thought. It's actually something that is the product of thought. So there are two different kinds of things. So things that are a product of thought are very much they're like temporary creations. I can give you an example of that. We hear about these different things, and sometimes you can have extreme examples. My mother for years has claimed to, it's not so much that she hears a voice, but sometimes she does, but there's like somebody, even back when I was younger, she would say that there is somebody like above her bed, like, and she can hear like a breath. And sometimes it even makes an odd noise. And I think I might have told this story before, but when we had gone down to visit my niece for her graduation, her high school graduation. And we had to drive through several states to get there. We almost dropped this. We almost carpooled together. We all carpooled together. And we stayed in this one hotel for the night. And my parents stayed in one bed and I stayed in the other. And I heard this very odd noise. It sounded like it was like this weird popping noise, but it kind of went, it was more measured. And I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe my father's snoring or something. Like, I just didn't really think anything of it. But then my mom said to me, hey, are you awake? I said, yeah. I said, what's up? She goes, do you hear that? I said, yeah. I said, isn't that Dad? She's like, no, that's my thing. Okay. Now, this was something completely unintentional. She's not a magician trying to create an egregore. This is something completely unintentional. But I got up and I could hear it. And I put my hand up over her and you can feel it. It's almost like this ball of energy. And it was interesting because to me, and I talked to several, prominent ghost hunters about this actually, when I had an opportunity to meet, and occasionally I've gone on things where I've been able to meet people who are fairly well known in the field. I had my own impression of what was going on, but I just asked them, I said, okay, well, this is what my mother experiences. And they said, it sounds like she needs a psychotherapist and not a ghost hunter. And that's just it. These are beings that are created from energy. And they are often created either out of anxiety or because there is something unconscious that we are just not dealing with, or we are too traumatized to deal with. And it ends up manifesting itself as this external thing that appears to be a guide. It may even have a name. And sometimes that's a very hard thing to distinguish because we experience something like that. And, and it's hard to know what the difference is with that. But I think it becomes evident after a while if this particular being is really a manifestation of your anxiety. Because another thing that can happen, in my experience, is that, and sometimes again, this could have a psychological origin. There could be something you're going through. For example, I see a lot of women today who are looking to free themselves of particular situations. And as they're trying to free themselves of different social categories, freeing themselves from ideas that maybe they've grown up with about what their role is as a woman. This is just for example, that you do all of this, and then what ends up happening is that you may, for example, attract the attention of what we think of as the sovereignty goddesses. There's a lot of women now who, I think part of the interest people have in my other work on the dark feminine is because, goddesses like the Morrigan, goddesses like Hecate, goddesses like Lilith, that people are gravitating to because they're in rebellion against a system. So to a certain degree, their connection to that goddess may be something that's happening because of, and something that's going on within them psychologically. Like this is a force. So the question is this a force they're creating, or is this a force that's working, that is attracted to them because they know that's the kind of work that they're doing? And it's almost like that force is there if they want to use that source, that force as a resource. That kind of rhymes, sort of. And so you might have this this kind of thing. But so it's kind of interesting to think about this. And oftentimes, the way that you sometimes know the difference, if you're dealing with something that is more of a manifestation of your own thoughts, it's either going to be something that just continually, I don't know, yeses to death, whatever it is that you want to hear, or it's something that could, sometimes it could change a little bit on a dime. It'll guide you down one road and then abruptly say, oh, well, I didn't want you to go down that road. And then you might kind of go, who am I talking to here? So there's things that you have to think about. Now, can people also attract negative energies in this way? Or what? Well, I don't know. I don't like the term negative energies, but energies that maybe don't have their best interests. Let's put it that way. Yeah, that is possible too. But generally there becomes something else. There becomes a weightiness to dealing with this energy. And it may be, because there are some energies, there's all kinds of, just like there's all kinds of people, there's all kinds of energies out there that can manifest and interact with you in different ways. And some of them, if they think that there's something that they can manipulate in you, they will do that. That was something that Lon-Milo Duquette only said about people who engaged in demonic evocations, as they said, you have to be careful because, even you have to be, he said, you have to be a Solomon. You have to be really solid in yourself. And oftentimes we don't know if we're a Solomon. The puffed up ego may be the substitute for being a Solomon. But that kind of work often quickly shows where the cracks are, where you're weak, where you feel, where you don't have confidence, where you feel afraid. Those things will come out very quickly in that kind of work. And I mean, you can do that, but the question is that the way you really want to do it? Well, I mean, some people do, but that's something you have to really think about. So, so it's interesting, but I just thinking about the idea that when an authentic guide kind of manifests itself, it's still going to take on a kind of a personality because it has to connect with you for the same reason that, within religion, you often need some kind of an image in order to connect with what you think of as God. Certain images we gravitate to. I think about when there was a split between the Catholic and Orthodox and Protestant churches around the time of the Reformation. And one of the complaints of the Reformation was that there was that Catholics were idolaters, that, they have all these statues of saints and they have all these images and these cathedrals with all this big fancy stuff. And you don't need all that to worship God. Well, yes and no. Because what happens when you don't have imagery like that is that then you start to worship the text. The text becomes your thing because there's something you fetishize. There's something that you cling to. The idea is it's a difference between iconography and idolatry. Iconography says, okay, this image is pointing me to something that is beyond thought. Idolatry says the image is the thing. Okay, that I'm going to. They had the whole idea of relics, right? Like, oh, I have the bones of Saint whoever, and this is going to protect me from all evil. Like, that's fetishizing. That's saying that the object in and of itself has power. Now, it's not that you can't imbue objects potentially, or that they might not have a mana, or they might not. They call it a mana or a numinous kind of quality to them, but they in themselves, they're not an embodiment of some kind of ultimate force. It's something. It's just another kind of an energetic tool that one might have. But even our image of God is a tool. Okay, it's a tool. It's something that you use to understand or try to relate to that which is not understandable. And your guides are pretty much going to be the same thing. They're either going to be a reflection of something you need in your life right now, which is why guides can move in and out of your life. And again, how externally real they are as well as internally real. A lot of us kind of who have worked in this kind of area for a long time feel it's probably kind of both. It's kind of both. Which way is it? So, yeah. So I don't know. I found myself thinking about the idea of what is unmanifest, because if you really want to talk about what's ultimate, it's unmanifest. If you want to talk about an angel in its truest form, or even a deity or whatever in its truest form, it's not something your mind can comprehend. If you actually said, okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to have a vision and I'm going to see it, you probably lose your mind, because it's just something that it's not even something the nervous system can handle. So they always appear in a form that is palatable. That doesn't mean that because their real form is terrifying, does not mean that it's therefore evil. We always tend to equate terrifying looking things with evil things. But sometimes that's not the case. And oftentimes they will shift forms to find a form that we can relate to, especially if they feel there's a need to relate to you. So but there's always that kind of separation between inner and outer. And for years I would have probably gone along with the idea that all of it is psychological projection. But as time has gone on, I'm kind of like, you know what? No, it all isn't psychological projection. There's some very real things that go on and that happen, and that I have, you can get validation for the fact that they are. So anyway, that was the thought I really wanted to share. The other thing I was going to share today is I happened to pull one of my yogic path cards today. Sometimes I have a variety of decks, and I always tend to use the same ones. But interestingly, the first card I pulled today was called Tantra. Okay. And in the Tantra card, I wanted to actually read this because one of the things we've been talking about on this live stream a lot is the integration of masculine and feminine energy. And it says, okay, so here's the positive thing. And also, this is an explanation of the word Tantra for people who misunderstand it as having something to do, or having exclusively to do with sex or with things like that, or sexual rituals. You are expanding into liberation, which is Tantra. Okay, they're calling Tantra as liberation. It actually means weaving, but okay, you're talking about it as liberation. Moving past the dualistic mind that judges everything as right or wrong, you are headed to the greater truth that comes from integration. Okay, so Tantra is about integration. It's not about that two-sided thing. We look at things in that two-sided way because that's the way we understand it, but that's the reality is not that. The structured masculine and flowing feminine within you are merging, allowing you to move towards infinite consciousness. The mature masculine creates presence, focus, stillness, and determination. So those are the elements of the masculine. The mature feminine results in creativity, flow, movement, sensuality, and nurturing. Both genders require a balance of these two energies. Continue to invite in all aspects of yourself: light, shadows, Shakti, Shiva, your cognition, and your intuition. Okay, now the reverse is also interesting to think about. Is there an aspect of yourself that you are denying, shaming, or judging? Are you suppressing shadow emotions such as anger, sadness, or loneliness? The wounded masculine creates feelings of separation, increased ego, competitiveness, and emotional detachment. The wounded feminine causes jealousy, gossip, low self-worth, need for external validation, and manipulation. Okay. So there you go. There's your qualities of the masculine and feminine as they manifest psychologically or in social interaction. Take a moment to reflect on what you observe and around yourself. Our external world is a reflection of the internal world, steering us in the direction we must examine and heal. So interesting thoughts there. That when we And we right now we're in a period of time where things feel quite wounded. And so, yeah, the idea of separation is the wounded masculine, that inflation of the ego. Like I was just talking about, that artificial inflation of the ego, which, you know, when you really get real and start working with that inner darkness, it kind of shows you where you're not as brave as you think you are, right? Competitiveness and emotional detachment, not in the sense of being able to take a step back and look at the big picture, but literally saying, yeah, you're hurting and I don't care. You know, that would be negative masculine. Like, doesn't matter to me. Rules are rules. Who cares if you're in pain? Suck it up. Get over it. You know, or I mean, well, there is some emotion in that, isn't there? There's, because sometimes people can just get very angry. But the emotional detachment in the sense of, you know, I can't empathize with you, or I don't have feelings about you. That would be a negative masculine. Negative feminine, or wounded feminine, wounded both of them really. Jealousy, gossip. Think about the fact of, like, how many places have I worked? I had one of my friends from childhood, when I talked to her years later, she always worked with computer programmers, and she was like, you know, she says, I always prefer to work around like an office full of guys rather than an office full of women, because women all seem to like be like, want to like talk about each other and, oh, look at her and look at this and that. And, you know, they smile to your face and they're like, ew, she did this and she did that. Like that always seems to go on in certain feminine dominated offices. Unfortunately, that's the negative masculine, or the wounded feminine, reacting to the animus in a very wounded way. That's what it does. Whereas she says men, they just punch, you know, guys, because they just punch each other in the arm and sit there playing Doom, or at least whatever video games they're playing at the time. So she said they just, you know, they're for her, in her mind, that was easier to deal with. So, but nonetheless, this is not necessarily about how men and women behave. It is just something that I've noticed, though, that groups of women particularly can get very, very gossipy. Okay. Low self-worth. Okay. The feeling that I'm not good enough. And that's definitely a negative animus projection. The idea that you feel judged and then you start judging yourself. The need for external validation and for manipulation. So take a moment to reflect on what you're observing. External world is a reflection of the internal world. Okay, as I said. So yeah, just some things to think about this morning, because all of this just has to do with in the way we experience what's separate. Understanding what the point is of experiencing things as separate. And a lot of that is just because our minds aren't capable of dealing. If we actually had to try to comprehend something as a whole, we're always going to be trying to comprehend it with the categories and the things that we're familiar with and the things that we know. That's why a lot of what we try, why we use myths, why we use scriptures, why you use certain types of storytelling and images to, or metaphors, to try to explain things that are beyond thought, or things that are experienced but do not lend themselves to being talked about. That's the reason that we do that. So, okay, let me go on with our reading for today. We had a rather spammy morning here, so I think there's, you know, I would love to absolutely have a moderator on this thread, but at the hours of the morning that I do this, there's nobody who's going to get up with me every day and do that. So unfortunately, so apologies. The earlier one feels like it was a bit stilted because it was just like a whole bunch of spammy comments that kind of came in, so I had to go through, and Restream's not only is easy about doing things, and then there was a problem, so it refreshed the whole feed. So anyway, just kind of noting that for people who may be in there and saying like, hey, what's going on with that? So yeah, so we're gonna do our reading for today. I'm gonna go back to the Osho Zen deck for this. And yeah, it's hard when you want to start a deep subject and you've got this thread of people and you're just kind of like, okay, let's get rid of these distractions here. And yeah, because talking about some stuff like this, it requires kind of careful thinking and careful expression. So let's see. Our reading for today. Okay, yeah. Our first card is the Ten of Pentacles, or the Ten of Rainbows in this one, which is the We Are the World card. Okay, so yeah, we've been talking about integration. We've been talking about separation versus integration. The way that thought works in that way, the fact that we are limited by thought, but there's also constructive ways in which we can use thought, but also the way in which our psyche, the complicated nature of our psyche, and how this can affect the way that we relate to the world, I think. All great information. Thank you, Alistair. Yeah, it's yeah, so thank you. And thank you for staying on and indicating you're still here, because I'm kind of like, I don't know. I think a lot of people might have just been like, okay, enough of this, I'm out. But yeah, so we are the world. So this is us thinking about how we fit into the community. How are we integrating in the big picture right now? But the inner feeling, of which maybe we're unaware and maybe we are kind of aware, is that of stress. But the stress card too, this is kind of that negative masculine, the idea that there's an inflation here. I have to be able to do it all. I have to be able to balance it all. And you know, the little monkey at the bottom with the pin, like, you know, you're going to kind of fall. You can potentially fall down with that, because we kind of feel like we're always, especially with a lot of things going on right now. I think a lot of people are in defensive mode, right? I feel like I have to defend myself. I have to, or I have to, in order to respond to what's going on, I have to act on a whole bunch of things at one time. This can also just be a way that we live our lives too. We just feel like, you know, we have a calm and quiet day. It's like, but I got to be doing something with this. You know, I have to, you know, oh, now I have the opportunity. I can, you know, repaint my house and I can do this. I mean, you know, we can get into those kinds of habits. And so internally, I think there is a lot of stress. But I also think internally, with this, I think people are just feeling unconsciously stressed. Again, I think I mentioned yesterday that some of the messages I've been getting from people are messages that are kind of like, wow, it's like really tense out there. Like you go out places and people are just kind of like, you know, they feel almost like a knotted stomach or a clenched fist. When I see that on the card, I feel like I'm the guy on the balloon. Yeah, actually, so do I, Kathleen. Yeah, it's just kind of like, yeah, it's so, this is what we're doing. We feel like we have to juggle all of these things, and that we have to be all these things to all these people, or keep up this kind of an image of doing all of these things. Now, it's perfectly fine to want to do a lot of different things. I think if you have an active and curious mind, you want to do a lot of stuff. Like me, in addition to what I'm doing, I'd love to learn like 3 languages and do this and that. But at some point, we have to be kind of like, okay, well, maybe we have to be a little more systematic about this, or maybe, you know, we need to take some time to not keep thinking, you know, to kind of, you know, allow ourselves to kind of be in the space that we're at. And the external feeling of which we are aware is the abundance card. Okay. So that's interesting. This is the King of Pentacles. So I think one of the things I think that has been coming up recently is this need to figure out what abundance is for us. Because as we've talked about, abundance is not always about material wealth. And so, yeah, there seems to be, so when I look at these 3 cards in a row, stress followed by the We Are the World, which is the 10 of Pentacles, followed by the King of Pentacles, or the abundance card, there seems to be an internal stress about, and I feel like this might be a collective stress, about our abundance, about whether or not we're going to have things, about whether or not we're going to lose things, right? But abundance is also a card of integration. It's worth noting. They call this card the Zorba the Buddha card, you know. So Zorba the Greek, who's this kind of very I don't know, pleasure-seeking, playing kind of character, with the Buddha, who we think of as being, you know, more aesthetic and more grounded and peaceful, meditating, abstaining. It's almost like the way in which those 2 forces work together, and we are aware that we are trying to find a balance between those kinds of forces. But internally, we may feel like we are trying to take on so many things, because we want that to happen. We want to feel that abundance. We want to feel secure in where we are. The King of Pentacles is the pinnacle of the suit that has to do with security. So this has to do with the way in which we feel secure. Now, the advice card that we have here is postponement. It's the 4 of Swords, okay? And how many times have we seen this, where we're looking at what's gray, but we're not looking at what's in color here? Now, there's a certain element of this that might remind us of the 4 of Cups, because you have the guy who's staring at the 3 cups with his arms crossed, but there's another cup being held out over here. And here you've got this woman who's kind of staring out at what's gray and not seeing what's colorful over here. So there is, even though different suits, 4 of Swords traditionally has to do with healing, the way in which we heal, and the way in which we may need to take a step back for ourselves to, you know, just to take a time out to relax. Just kind of what I was saying. you're doing too much of this and you might need a timeout, and that it's okay to take a timeout. But I think with this card, it's like we're postponing the enjoyment of life. We're postponing everything because we have to wait for this thing to happen. We have to wait for that. We have to. And I think there's a sense in here that there's always going to be chaos. There's going to be more or less at different times, but we are always existing within this system. And there's kind of a need to step back and to find where joy is. I always feel that even if we are in a world, okay, even if we look at the world right now as being collectively in a tumultuous and perhaps terrible state, then we need to say, I am postponing, I don't want to postpone my own happiness, because there's always going to be somebody in the world I disagree with. There's always going to be somebody who's going to create a problem. There's always going to be a conflict. And yeah, there are different things that we encounter, different challenges we have to navigate. But ultimately, we should still say, you know what, the best way to rebel against something like that is to say, you know what, I'm going to be happy anyway. I'm going to find my joy anyway. I don't care, other people, there can be all of this stuff. There can be all this bitterness and rage, but I'm not going to take on feelings that are not mine. If you were having a perfectly good day and then like you opened your feed and went, well, fuck, now you feel now you've got all this stuff that's upsetting you. It's kind of like you don't need to take that stuff on, even understanding that it's out there, even understanding that we are empathetic with the people around us. We want to connect with the people around us, right? And we want to do something meaningful for people. But sometimes one of again, it always has to start with yourself. So you want to start from that place where you feel like you have the strength, like whatever's going on around you, you're still solid in what you're doing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to cling to thoughts about who we are. We're just solid in saying, you know what, I can trust myself. It's really about trust, learning to trust ourselves. And trusting that, because again, you've got this colorful things here, and you've got this woman who looks like she's gray, but you do see she has the color on her shirt. This reminds me a little bit of a painting. Joseph Campbell talked about this. Carl Jung had a patient who was very, very depressed, severely depressed. And he asked her to make a painting for him. And what she did was she drew a picture. It was very gray, kind of like this one, but it was on a shore and there were all these rocks. But inside the rocks, she had drawn these kind of gold lines. And basically the way that was interpreted is the gold is trapped inside the rocks. Okay. So all this gray area was kind of her depression, or her being clouded or being unsure. The gold was where her life energy was, where her joy was. And she believed that she was alone and that she had nothing. But then later, through more therapy, eventually what came out is then when she drew another picture, the gold suddenly burst out of the rocks. And she realized that the gold was, in fact, her friends. In fact, those were on the Dream Workshop yesterday. Probably remember this was a conversation that came up, that your friends are not always the people, the friends and supporters are not always the people that you think they are. And that you yourself have this. I've been playing with the Fairy Oracle a little bit this morning as well, because I was up quite early. And I got the Sylvanas card. And the Sylvanas card is interesting because that says you are, that you are seeing yourself reflected in the world, or you will see yourself reflected through your friends. And oftentimes what you see is better than what you think is there. A lot of times we place very, very negative and shameful judgments on ourselves. But ultimately, that actually, if we look to our friends look at us, and the people who get us look at us and they say, no, I see something good in you. And remember, that's being reflected back. Those are your good qualities being reflected back. So you access the gold sometimes in that way through other people. Okay. Now our outcome card is change, Wheel of Fortune. It's the Wheel of Change. And what's interesting about this card, if I really look at it, I mean, you've got all of these things that are happening, but you actually have the little yin yang symbol in the center. So it's interesting that I was talking about spirit guides, and then I was talking about Tantra in the sense of working these two things, merging these two things together. So it's almost like that unified masculine feminine is at the center of the wheel. And as I've said, change will happen and we can't avoid change, But if you stay at the center of the wheel, you don't get yourself dragged around by it. Okay, you manage to just kind of stay in your center. And the one who's in the center also has this integrated masculine and feminine energy. It's the idea that both are integrated. And now, again, I don't say that with respect to people needing to feel like, oh, well, I don't know that I'm integrated, so, you know, I'm doing it wrong, I'm bad, I'm making a mistake. I don't want people to feel that way, because the bottom line is we just all kind of have to be aware of like, oh, maybe this isn't necessarily true. Maybe I don't necessarily have to look at it this way. Maybe the fact that I'm, whatever you identify with, maybe that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you identify with this means you're this. You know, you don't have to have those kinds of things. You just need to be solid in who you are. And nobody is ever unilaterally one thing. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, well, you know, because you have these politics, or this is your, gender or sexual identification, or it's this, this means these are all the boxes that you check. No, that's kind of social judging. Ultimately, you don't need to dance around to keep up with that social judging. You are abundant. Zorba the Buddha, you're going to be more than one thing. You know, I'll give a stupid example of it. I mean, with me, a lot of people say, oh, you're interested in Eastern spirituality, you're interested in yogas, you're interested in this and that. So therefore, you know, you must be a vegetarian, and you must be somebody who abstains from everything. And I'm like, no, man, I'm like, you know, I eat meat and I drink beer. I don't care. You know, I mean, I'm not in this space where I feel like I have to create a certain image or dress a certain way or do certain things. You know, there's judgments that people have, and, you know, and all of us are going to have like that. You're going to be, that's why I always say, when you find out that somebody has a certain political mindset, or they have certain things, oftentimes it's more nuanced than just, I accept this and I accept it all wholesale. Typically, even when we accept something, there's something about what we're accepting that maybe we disagree with or we don't like. And that's the mark of somebody who's not just going along with the crowd, who goes, maybe I don't feel this way about this. Maybe even though I like what this, person, figure, politician, what they do, whoever, maybe there's things that they do that I don't like too. Like, you don't have to, people who like the stuff that I do every morning, there may be things I say that you don't like too. So, and that's normal. I mean, we're not going to all be in 100% agreement on everything. So integration is about, it's about trusting yourself, and it's about allowing for new ideas without necessarily feeling like at least the starting point is, you don't have to feel like you have to accept those ideas. Sometimes you accept and learn a new viewpoint, but as we transform, we become different people, and what we thought, believed, and whatever in the past may not be who we are now. And that's entirely normal. The idea that you have to be the same person throughout your entire life, well, then you haven't grown at all, or you've just literally been a product of what other people say you should be. So anyway, we're at 8:18. Thank you guys for bearing with the weirdness at the beginning of this live stream, and sticking around. And I love that reminder. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome, Kathleen. Yeah. And it was good to see you yesterday. And and thank you, everybody who kind of shows up regularly and participates and puts up with some of the nonsense that YouTube has that I didn't tend to get on Instagram, but everybody's abandoning Instagram, or most people are. So I'm trying to branch out more. Maybe I'll try to do a couple over there as well. And for people who are still there, I don't know. Anyway, we'll worry about that another day. Have a great Sunday, and I will see you.